During the next couple of lectures, we'll be drawing a toxic gas explosion that will look just like this. And it can actually be used for more purposes than you think. For example, here, I've combined this effect with the unity particle system and a screen shake. As a result, I got a cool effect for some falling obstacles. All right, let's get right into it. Same as always, I'm creating a new document in Photoshop. Keeping the dimensions at 1500 on 1500 pixels and the resolution at 300 pixels per inch. Okay, then I'm picking the dark gray color and filling the background with it. Good. Finally, we can add a new layer and start drawing the first frame. For this animation, I'm going to use a combination of a brush tool with a pen tool. Let's pick the brush tool first. The explosion will start at the bottom of the canvas and gradually expand to the upper part. So the first frame will mark the very start when the explosion is still just a small cloud of gas. I'm picking the green color from the swatches panel on the right and making it a tiny bit darker. Okay, then I'm increasing the brush size and clicking here at the lower part of the canvas. Make sure that you work with the hard round brush. Then, in changing the brush size again and making a couple of additional clicks. This starts to look like a tiny cloud. Next, I'm going to emphasize that these gas moves upwards. To do that, let's add a small tail to this cloud. I'm switching to the curvature pen and creating a rounded curve here below. Then moving upwards to make the shape look thing. And also make sure that the lower tip looks sharp. Press Enter. Great. I'm pressing Ctrl plus T and making a few small adjustments to the tail, like the width and the rotation angle. Perfect. The shape looks pretty good to me. So let's select both of the layers and merge them together. That will just keep the layers simple and organized. Next, I would like to add a few highlights for this cloud. So, I'm picking the base green color and changing it to light green, like this. Okay, switching to the brush tool. Created a new layer and clicking inside the round parts of the cloud, like this. Holding the Alt key and creating a clipping mask to make sure that the highlights stay inside the cloud boundaries. Good. Now let's add a highlight for the tail as well, using the curvature pen tool. You should pretty much follow the shape of the tail and don't worry if the edges don't match perfectly because you can always make adjustments. I'll place the shape a bit higher, like so. Yeah, that seems to be all right. Well, the cloud shape looks pretty good, but it doesn't look toxic enough to me. Let's add a new layer and pick another shade of green, a much more saturated one. Okay, switching to the brush tool and reducing the brush size like this. Then making a few clicks in the central part of the cloud, like so. Great! This is going to be the toxic core of this gas cloud. Finally, let's select all of the layers except for the background and create a separate group for them. Let's call it Frame 1. All right, well, the first frame is complete, so let's disable the background, visibility, and press Ctrl plus Shift plus Alt plus E to merge all of the visible layers into a separate one, renaming it to Frame 1 inch as well. Excellent, creating a new layer right away. On the frame number 2, the cloud will become significantly bigger. The gas will rise pretty fast, releasing the toxic fumes upwards. I'm switching to the dark green color, selecting the brush tool and increasing the brush size, like this. Then I'm covering the upper part of the gas cloud with the circles like so. Moving upwards. Make sure to use different brush sizes to randomize the cloud shape. I'm trying to give it as many details as I can. Then let's give it a direction and add a tail. The tail looks similar to the one on the previous frame, but it is longer. We can even make it a bit thicker, like so. Nice. Let's merge the cloud and the tail into a single layer to keep it simple. Okay, now it's time for the highlights. Picking the lighter green, switching to the brush tool, and start filling the larger parts of the cloud. Also, please do it on a separate layer. I just forgot to add a new layer. But it is better to keep the highlights and the shadows separated in case you want to make changes later on. Okay, back to the topic. Once we're done drawing the highlights for the main cloud, let's proceed to the tail. Same as before, I'm using the pen tool and creating a rounded curve at the right side of the tail. Good. Let's make a few small adjustments. Yeah, looks good enough. Next, to keep the file organized, let's group these new layers, calling the new group Frame 2. Great! Now this frame is still lacking toxicity, so let's create a new layer for it. Picking the saturated green color that we've used on the frame number 1. Switching to the brush tool and adding a few smaller circles inside the large areas of the cloud. I'm creating a few separated particles and adding the details to almost every shape. Finally, once you're satisfied with how the cloud looks, switch off the background and merge the visible layers into a new one. Rename it to Frame 2. Excellent! Creating a layer for the new frame and picking the darker green color. Great! On the frame number 3, the gas cloud will expand even further. This time, however, we'll make it go to the right and left as well. I'm choosing a large brush and start covering the upper part of the cloud with the circles, making the clouds thinner at the top, then adding a tip to the right side, and shaping up the left side as well. Then adding a few details here and there. Okay, it looks quite interesting already. Let's add a tail to this shape. Selecting the pen tool and creating a curve like so. Actually, to make the tail look like it's moving with a cloud, let's make it a bit different from before. The tip should move upwards like this. Let's adjust the rotation to fit the cloud in a better way. And make the tail thicker, since we have a bigger cloud now. A few last touches. Awesome! I like how the shape looks, so merging these two layers. Then let's go ahead and proceed with the highlights. Make sure you've created a new layer for that. Okay, I'm using the same light green as on the previous frame and covering most of the area inside the cloud. I'm trying to follow the original shape, more or less. Basically, the darker green layer should act like an outline, and that's what will make this toxic gas look cartoony. Don't forget to add the highlights for the details as well. Yeah, I think that should do it. Lastly, adding a highlight for the tail as well. and merging the highlight layers to keep them simple. Great. And finally, let's add a few smaller toxic clouds using the saturated green color, just like we did for the previous frames. Keep in mind to create a new layer for that. And play with the brush sizes to make the clouds look more interesting. You can see that I'm creating a number of clouds, and you also don't have to connect between the shapes. Adding a few last details. Looks pretty good. Same as always, let's move all of the new layers under a separate group and call it Frame 3. Then I'm switching off the background layer and pressing CTRL plus Shift plus ALT plus E to create a separate frame, renaming it to Frame 3 inches as well. Awesome. Let's draw one more frame before we finish this lecture. On the frame number 4, the cloud will move a bit higher and will expand to the sides even further. I'm selecting the darker green, switching to the brush tool, and making sure that I work with a new blank layer. Then I'm covering the upper part of the cloud with some randomly sized circles. Afterwards, I'm going to add a tail to the cloud and draw the highlights, including the smaller saturated ones. Since the procedure is pretty much the same as before, I'm going to speed up the video to save you some time. All right, we've added a lot of details and even split the tail into 2 separate parts. This will create a motion for the tail and will make it look like it starts to dissipate. The toxic highlights look pretty interesting too. However, we can improve them even further. Let's add another layer of highlights that will give the cloud more volume and increase the feel of toxicity. I'm picking the bright yellow color, creating a new layer, and start adding some tiny circles on top of the saturated highlights. Make sure that you stay inside the boundaries and create a few separated shapes for each one of the toxic clouds. See, now this frame really starts to shine. A few last details. Great. Looks like this frame is complete, so let's organize its layers in a new group and call it Frame 4. Then let's merge these layers into a separate one and call it Frame 4 inches as well. Awesome. We've completed the first 4 frames of the gas explosion animation, Well done. In the next lecture, we're going to draw the rest of the frames and test the final result. So see you in the next one. All right, let's continue and draw the frame number 5. On the new frame, the cloud will split into a few smaller ones. Each one of the tips will move further away from the center, separating from the main cloud. I'm creating a new layer, picking the dark green color and selecting the brush tool. Then I'm increasing the brush size and start covering the right part of the clouds with the circles. Since it's pushed aside, I'm going outside of the original boundaries. Okay, I believe that's good enough. Let's proceed to the upper part. This one will go up like so, using different sizes of the brush to add some details. And some final touches to the cloud on the right. Great. Now, moving to the left side. The procedure is pretty much the same as in some larger circles that overlap with the cloud on the previous frame. Then, changing the brush size to make the shape look detailed and random. Yeah, this should do. Finally, let's draw a smaller cloud in the center. Even though the tips are detached from the core and have formed their own clouds, I still want to preserve the central part. This way, the toxic gas will look heavy and thick, and that's the effect I'm looking for. Don't forget to add the details. Great. And lastly, let's add a tail to the central cloud. Same as before, I'm using the pen tool for that. This time, however, the tail should be very small. I'd say just the tip of the tail as we knew it. Yes, looks pretty good. I think I can add a tiny cloud here in between to make the frame look a bit richer. Then adding some tiny details here and there. Excellent. Placing the new layers under a separate group and calling it Frame 5. Okay then, merging the clouds with its tail layer to keep the layer structure clean and simple. Good. Next, I'm adding a new layer inside the group and picking a lighter green color. As you might have guessed, we're going to have the highlights for this frame. I will start from this shade of green, then proceed to the toxic saturated hue, and finally, a layer of yellow particles. Each one of these types of highlights should be placed on a separate layer. That will save you a lot of work in case you'll need to make changes later. Okay, since we've done this process a few times already, I will increase the speed of the video to save your time. All right, the clouds look pretty awesome. So let's disable the background visibility for now and press Ctrl plus Shift plus Alt plus E to merge the visible layers into a new one, renaming it to Frame 5. Good. Another frame is complete now. Before we proceed to the next frame, let's make a small adjustments to all of the previous ones. It seems that I don't have much space on the left side, and I won't be able to draw a proper movement for the left cloud. So let's select all of the layers and the groups, except for the background, switch to the Move tool, and move everything to the right until all of the layers are aligned with the middle. Yeah, that's much better. Let's go ahead and draw the next frame. On the frame number 6, each one of these clouds will move a bit further away. Also, they'll become a bit smaller. In addition to that, I'll add some tiny particles to show that the gas is spreading. I'm adding a new layer to the top of the layers list, selecting the base color and switching to the brush tool. Now let's draw the shapes of the clouds. I'll start with the upper cloud this time and cover the top edge with the circles. I'm trying to make the new cloud wider than the previous one, but also shorter. This will emphasize that the gas cloud is moving farther away from the center of the explosion. Moving to the right side, using different brush sizes here as well. Then creating a motion for these small particles. Drawing a smaller cloud on top of the central one like so. And finally, creating a cloud for the left one too. Let's draw a few little particles here and there. This will make the frame look a lot more interesting. And turning off the visibility for the previous frame. And adding a few final touches. Great! I'm not going to draw a tail on this frame because it should dissipate completely by now. So it seems that the base is finished, and we can move to the next step and add the highlights. The procedure is exactly the same as before. First, we'll add a layer of lighter green, then a layer of toxic green, and lastly, a layer of yellow. Since you already know how it's done, I'll speed up the video once again. Once you're satisfied with how the frame looks, make sure to group the layers and name the group Frame 6. Okay, after that, you can disable the background layer and merge the visible layers into a new one. Rename it accordingly. Great, another frame is done, and now it's time to move on to the next frame. Frame number 7 will be quite similar to the one we've created just now. The difference is that the clouds will move even farther away and there will be more tiny particles. This is the turning point when the clouds start to dissipate. I'm creating a new layer, picking the lighter green and selecting the brush tool. Starting from this frame, we will not use the dark green anymore. Since the clouds are dissipating, they should look lighter than before. And this is why we won't need the dark outline. I'm drawing a smaller cloud that overlaps the upper one. Then adding a smaller particle next to it, and a few more details. Good. Then I'm creating a motion for this tiny particle. It should move somewhere over here. And this particle should move over here to the right. Adding a couple of additional ones to create a rich explosion, and proceed into the large cloud on the right. This cloud should become smaller too. Something like this will be enough. Creating a motion for the particle down here. And adding a few tiny ones. Okay, moving on to the central cloud. This one will move a little bit upwards and become even smaller than before. Adding a particle next to it. Good. This tiny one should move a bit down and left. And I feel like I can add a few smaller particles here and there. And then proceed to the large cloud to the left. It is going to move further to the left and maybe down. Just follow the angle of the left cloud on the previous frame. A few last details. I'm trying to make each shape and particle look unique and detailed. Nice. Now it's time for the highlights. I'm creating a new layer and picking the saturated green. Then I start drawing the toxic clouds inside the existing shapes while staying inside the boundaries. Next, I'll add the yellow highlights on a new layer. Well, you're already familiar with the process, right? So let me increase the speed again until it's complete. All right, the frame looks good to me, so I'm grouping the layers and calling the new group Frame 7. Right after that, I'm turning off the background layer and creating a merged layer with all of the visible ones, renaming it to Frame 7 as well. Excellent. On the frame number 8, each one of these clouds will split into multiple smaller ones. Also, there will be a lot more particles, emphasizing the power of the explosion. creating a new layer and picking the light green. Then splitting this upper cloud into a few smaller pieces like so. Then the one next to it. And the one on the left. Don't forget to create a motion for all of the small pieces. They should become even smaller than before. Here comes the central cloud. Then these little particles up here. And the large cloud on the left. Let's split it up as well. Make sure that you didn't forget any of the particles. We should create a motion for each and every one of them. This will look very beautiful once we'll play the animation. Finally, let's add the details for the bigger clouds, like so. And draw a few tiny dots to complement the main clouds. Yes, this should be enough. Let's create a new layer and pick the saturated green for the toxic highlights. I'm adding a few tiny spots on top of almost every cloud and particle. Then I'll draw the yellow ones as well. This is going to take me a few minutes to complete, so I'll speed up the video once more. Okay, as you can see, I've created a separate group and merged the layers into a new one. We can say that the frame number 8 is complete now and move on to the frame number 9. Creating a new layer for it. Good. We've reached the last stage of the explosion when the gas clouds become very small, right before they disappear. All the larger clouds will split up even further. I'm using the light green color as the base and starting from the upper cloud once again, then moving to the right. And splitting every large cloud that I see. Same with the central one. And the cloud on the left. Great. After that, I'm drawing the next position for each one of the particles. Make them even smaller on a new frame and try not to keep any of them, even the tiny dots. Trust me, this is going to look fabulous once you'll see it in action. You can add a few additional dots if you like. Great. I think the frame looks detailed enough, so I'm going to add the highlights. Same as before, I'm going to draw the toxic green first, and then add the yellow on top of it. Then I'll create a group for these layers and merge them into a separate frame. The process is no different from what I've shown before, so I'll speed up the video for the last time. All right, so the frame number 9 is done as well. We have 2 more frames to draw, creating a new layer right away. Good. On the frame number 10, all of the clouds have almost completely dissipated. We've got only the toxic cores left. So I'm making the next positions of the larger particles here. Adding a couple of details. Okay, try not to forget about any of them. Then I'm building a motion for the smaller particles. Each one should move farther away from the center of the explosion. Try not to skip even the tiny ones. Yeah, I think that's enough. Creating a new layer at the top of the list and switching to the yellow color. Adding the highlights for the larger particles now. This shouldn't take much time since most of the particles are so small you can't really add the highlights for them. Okay, I think we're good. Grouping the layers and calling the group Frame 10. Then merging these layers into a separate frame and renaming it as well. Excellent. And last but not least, the frame number 11. Here we'll show just the traces of the particles and won't even add any highlights for them. I'm creating a new layer and drawing just a few small dots with the saturated green color. Then add in the next positions for some of the tiniest ones, but not for all of them. Great, this should do. Also, since we used just a single layer for the last frame, I'm not going to create a group for it. Just renaming the last layer to Frame 11. Perfect. Finally, it's time to test the animation. I'm saving my work in 2 separate PSD files, one for all of the source material and another one for the final frames only. In the frames file, I'm deleting all of the layers groups and keeping just the frames, turning on the visibility for each one of the frames. Good. Next, let's adjust the opacity for the last few layers to make the dissipation stage look gentle and smooth. On the frame number 8, let's set the opacity to 75%. For the frame number 9, it should be 50%. Frame number 10 should have 25%. And as for the last frame, 10 persons only. Great. Then I'm going to Window and Jeet, Timeline and Jeet, Create Frame Animation and Jeet, Make Frames from Layers. Same as always, deleting the frame number 1 from the timeline because it contains the background only. And then enabling the background layer for all of the frames at once. Then hitting play to test the results. Fantastic. The toxic cloud rises from the ground and quickly spreads into different directions. Watch this tiny movement of the tail. It really adds to the cartoony feel of the animation. Also, you can see that each one of the small particles has a continuous motion, making the explosion look powerful and detailed. All right, That's it for the toxic gas explosion animation. I hope you have enjoyed these lessons and got more confident about the explosion animations. The next section of the course is going to be a bit different from what you've learned so far. We will create a powerful lightning strike animation. So see you there.